Recently, I was talking with a friend that had attended the church that I grew up at, and now that I pastor, and he moved out of the state, like so many people who once called California home. And after leaving California and leaving our church, he and his family, they have had a rather difficult time finding a comparable church home to go to. That situation has played out a lot over the last several years. In fact, it has not been unusual for me to receive emails or calls or text messages from former members of our church that moved out of California. And they continue to call our church their home once they are in New Mexico or Idaho, Tennessee, or some other non-California place. They continue to watch our services online. In some cases, they continue to give to our church online as well. Now, I'm certainly not advocating that is a good way to do things. Membership at a distance. Long distance relationships aren't exactly the best, even as it relates to a church. And I do believe that the local church is meant to be local to your physical location. The Greek word that is translated church in the New Testament, ekklesia, it is a general Greek word meaning assembly or gathering, a community, a congregation. And while it is true that there is one global church that is Christ's church, it is also true that there are churches, plural, in various places. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, Paul writes about how he had given orders to the churches of Galatia. So there were multiple gatherings or assemblies, churches, in the region of Galatia, what we know of now as kind of southwestern Turkey. And within the city of Corinth, there were apparently many small gatherings. They were overseen by overseeing leaders or elders in people's homes. That's where they met at the beginning. These gatherings were places where people enjoyed what the New Testament calls fellowship with one another. They shared with one another, they cared for one another, they prayed for one another. Sometimes they supported one another, sometimes they corrected one another. The gathering within the local assembly is, I believe, essential for Christians. As it has been said before, there are no Lone Ranger Christians. If you are a Christian, I believe that you should be a member of a local church congregation. And when I say member, that can mean a lot of different things. I grew up in a church that didn't have formal membership or a membership process. If you were connected to the church, you attended regularly, you served within the congregation, you gave to the church, you knew who we were and we knew who you were, then you were a part of the church. It was pretty casual, very Southern California. Now, all that aside, back to my conversation with my friend who has had a hard time finding a church like our church in other places. I don't think I realized for a very long time how hard it is to find what I would call a good church. There are a lot of videos online about bad church experiences, especially right now where a lot of people are talking about spiritual abuse in churches. Now, I know I'll probably get some haters when I say this, but a lot of the spiritual abuse stories that I've seen online, a lot of times it seems like people getting upset because the leadership of the church that they attended wouldn't do the thing that they wanted them to do in the way that they wanted them to do it. And so they moved on to another church and they talked about how they were abused at that church. They had a bad experience at that church. Now, that's not to say that there are not real experiences of spiritual abuse. I'm not minimizing the fact that there are real experiences of abuse, but we live in a hyper victim culture that calls abuse at every turn, which isn't helpful or good, because if everything is abuse, then ultimately nothing is abuse, and there are real issues of abuse that need to be dealt with. But a lot of the stories that are out there about bad church experiences really come down to like, well, they wouldn't do my thing in my way, and so I'm upset. I kind of digress a little bit. I didn't realize how much I have taken for granted that I am, I think, a part of a good church. Now, I'm 100% sure that I have offended and ticked off a number of people who came to the church that I grew up at and now pastor. And I bet there are some victims out there that are convinced that myself and our leadership at our church are somehow abusive because we wouldn't do their thing in their way. But from what I can tell, our church is a good church. And I say that because we have qualified leaders and we preach the scriptures, we preach the gospel. We believe in conversion and transformation. We have a strong biblical theology. We are committed to evangelism and mission. We believe that discipleship is necessary and essential. We have a strong fellowship within the body of the church. We are committed to connecting with God, one another, and the world through Jesus. And sadly, from what I have been able to tell, as I talk with those that have left our area and have tried to find a comparable good church, that's far more rare than I realized. For a long time, I believe that I have taken it for granted that I am a part of a good church, and I'm convinced more than ever that societies thrive when they have good churches. I think that good churches help develop and support good families, and I think that good families build good societies. And when we see the breakdown of society, I think you can trace it back to broken families in large part, which I think is directly connected to not so good churches. And though we have a lot of churches in America, far too few of them are good churches. And that's a real problem. Something to think about. We'll see you next time.